So, Glenn, I just introduced you with the last planner, that you're the father of that, and that you know a lot about big room concepts and the connection between VDC and Lean and how that all works together.
We'll find out.
So the stage is yours.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for coming. I'm going to get right into it. I just want to do one thing, and that's encourage you to interrupt me. Okay? I don't need to cover every slide. I don't need, I have nothing that I have to do besides have a conversation with you. But to have that conversation, I need to hear your voice. So if you have a comment, if you have a question, speak up, all right? Don't hold it. Will you?
Yes.
Will you? Will you? Okay. All right. Okay, here we go. What I'm going to do is just first provide a quick definition of lean construction, and it's my definition. It's not necessarily universally agreed, but so that you can kind of understand where I'm coming from. I'm then going to talk about the last planner system, then big room, or what I would call as part of creating a project society, and then virtual design and construction. Am I loud enough? Okay, all right. All right, so what is lean construction? I think it's commonly, not universally, but commonly understood that lean is a specific set of tools, right? And it's understood as that limited set, right? And I think that's a wrong understanding. Even though those tools are very powerful, I don't think it really captures the essence of what lean is. So I propose that lean is a fundamental management philosophy, a way of managing, of organizing and managing human organizations, a wide variety of different types of organizations. And the more experience we have with it, the more the boundary keeps moving out, right? So it's really a philosophy. But how do you capture a philosophy, right? So I propose to do it in terms of the ideal pursued, the principles followed in the pursuit of that ideal, and the methods used in the application of those principles, right? And we're not going to get all the way through that long list today, but we're going to do a little bit of it, right? So here we go. So a statement of the lean ideal. Give customers, internal and external, exactly what they need to accomplish their purposes with no waste. Two things at least can be unpacked in this statement, right? One is the concept of customer. So internal and external. If we're thinking of a project environment, the paying customer, the using customer, other stakeholders like the neighborhood, the state, the society, the planet, right? Ultimately, the species is a customer for what we do, right? Because we create the built environment. Yeah? So with that comes obligations to a wide range of customers. Centered in the paying customer because they initiate the project, but not limited to them. Right? The second thing we can explain is waste. So I suggest that we understand waste as anything with a cost of any kind. It could be a cost that's monetizable or not. It could be scrap. It could be the release of noxious emissions into the atmosphere. It could be stress, increased stress on people who are involved in projects, right? A waste of any kind, the elimination of which does not reduce value delivered to the customer. Okay? The third thing to note about this ideal is that it's like Don Quixote's impossible dream. It's something that you can always get closer to, but you can never fully exhaust or achieve, right? It's always possible to deliver more value, and it's always possible to reduce more waste. Yeah? And it will ever be thus. Right? So embarking on the lean journey is really a eternal journey. Right? It's forever. It's not trying to get from point A to point B. It's not trying to become lean rather than fat. It's trying to adopt a way of behaving in the world that pursues that ideal. Right? So, principles, I'm of the mind that there are some principles that aim us at that goal, that ideal, that are more universal than others. Right? They apply to, if not every kind of human organization with every kind of purpose, to a broad range. Right? And then some are more specific to the kind of work that we do, right? The built environment. So here's just a handful of principles that look to me to be possibly universal. You look at them and tell me what you think. And this isn't descriptive, this is aspirational, right? So what do you think? Anybody?
Well, I think the first point there is sort of contradicting the, we have short-term financials that sort of drive the corporation.
Right.
But what we really need is the long-term view.
Okay.
But you always sort of sort that out. So it's a give and take. The situation now is more a give and take than sort of a unified strategy.
Right. Okay.
So that's a hard part, I think.
It's a hard one, but do you agree that it's an appropriate one?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Yeah, this isn't to say, this isn't easy, right? This is not easy, but it's not complicated either. It's just hard. Any other comments or questions about these? What do you think? Do you think they do apply universally or near universally? Is there anything you wouldn't want to endorse? Huh? Okay, let's look at some principles that are more particular to the project world. Because we design and make things, right? Everything that is designed and made on the planet is designed and made first in a project, right? Even refrigerators, right? Once designed, there are multiple copies made of that design, but the first production is in a project, right? So understanding projects as a way of creating and recreating our lives is absolutely vital, right? So, some principles. Again, I'll let you read it. I don't need to read to you. Observations, questions? Are these appropriate principles, or do you understand each of them, first of all? And if you understand them, do you think they're appropriate for the world of construction?
I think they are really good ones, but if the previous were hard, this is 2 times harder, I think. It's really hard to achieve.
Okay.
But it's easy when you read it. So.
Well, what my research has shown is that these are among the principles that are necessary to approach optimality in project performance. Otherwise, you're assuring that you're going to have inferior results to what could be otherwise achieved. Right? Doesn't make it easier, but it makes it really important. Right? Okay. So I hope just to give you a sense about how I'm approaching this, how I think about it, right? This isn't a set of tools. Lean will take anything that is fit for purpose and use it as a tool in the pursuit of that ideal and the application of those principles. And we'll see some of those tools that have been appropriated by Lean in action in the later part of this presentation. But let's turn to Last Planner. I'm going to give a kind of historical account of it. Hopefully that will be useful. I'm going to use this, even though it was developed later, as a way of explaining how we got started. So this is this was Philip. Philip's the foreman of a pipe fitter crew on a wafer fabrication plant for Texas Instruments in Dallas in 1996. Okay? And we're working with his company to implement this Last Planner system. And some of the features of it you can perhaps see right here. Right? So this is Philip's, actually it's his first Last Planner weekly work plan. And what he's got, we don't have a pointer, do we? Doesn't matter. Okay.
It's below the screen.
Ah. Oh, that's good. That's fine. I remember these. Okay, so he's broken his crew into sub-crews. Silvano Modesto and Terry are going to install pipe hangers overhead in Building K, through which gas and fuel oil risers or pipes will be run once those hangers are installed. Going to install hangers Monday and Tuesday, and then run the pipe through those risers through the rest of a 6-day work week. Right? So this is one of the key characteristics here is definition, right? The people who are going to do the work need to be able to tell by looking at the assignment what's to be done, where it's to be done, what's needed to do it, right? So that they can determine, and hopefully someone's determined before they get the task, whether or not it's feasible, right? They can see, they can go to the place, they can determine if they need to have a scaffold built, they can pull leads up to that place, right? So everything here is really, we may not know necessarily what it means because we don't know the project, but they do, and I think in this case, they would know everything they need to know, right? Okay, so he does that for all these different sub-crews, so it's planned to the day, every day of the week, and at the end of the week, he marks up, was it done or not? And PPC stands for percent plan complete, right? So that's a key metric here, and it's a measure of workflow reliability. That is the extent to which this weekly work plan of this crew is an accurate predictor of a future state of the project, right? And the reason that's important is because once they do their work, someone's going to come behind them and build on top of it, right? Right? And if he's not predictable, they won't be able to take the benefit of planning, right? And your productivity is necessarily going to be worse. So the real driver, the first driver of productivity is the ability to match load and capacity. This is a predictor of load, right, on the next trades. Yeah. Okay, so back to PPC. So we just counted up. There's no partial credit. We're not measuring productivity here, and we're not measuring progress, right, percent earned towards the completion of the project. We're just, so we're very interested in whether the completion of this work releases work to the next trade, right? And so it's either on or off, right? It's either done or it's not done, right? If it's 99% done and you can't release that work to somebody else so they can go to work, it's not done. Huh? So with that definition, we say no, no, yes, no, yes, 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 no, yes, right? And the PPC is the percentage of the ratio 5 divided by 9, right? 9 total tasks, 5 completed tasks. Yeah? And that's about what? 55%, right? Yeah. We asked Philip also to indicate, well, why didn't you do what you said you were going to do, right? And in this case, it's a change in the elevation of these prefabricated hangars. So they have to be refabricated before this task can go forward. Here, it's a problem with materials, material delivery, both late delivery and incomplete, okay? And then this is an eye injury to a weld-out welder, probably from a flash burn, right? Okay? When I look at this, it looks to me like garden variety things that happen, right? There's nothing exceptional here, right? In fact, it's too garden variety, right? It's ordinary. 55%. Now, I did a study earlier than this that caused me to develop the last planner system, in which I studied the multiple projects for 7 different companies, both in the design and in the construction phase of those projects. 435 data points, I think. All 7 companies were chosen because they were regarded as excellent in project management. The projects were chosen in those companies so that they were all on budget and on schedule, okay? And the average PPC was 54%. So, what do you think? What does that tell us?
There's a big place for big room for improvement.
Big room for improvement. Our normal, our good, is really not very good, right? What counts as good now is not very good, right? Okay, so I set out to, I built this system in pieces. It didn't come full-blown from my head. I first started to work on the problem, well, how do we improve percent plan complete, right? And again, the reason why that's so important is because of the predictable release of work from one specialist to the next. It might be from the architect to a structural engineer, or it might be from a pipe fitter crew to an instrumentation crew, right? It could be anywhere, in any type of process, right? But I think what we discover here is 2 things. One is that there's been a missing dial in the cockpit of the project manager. They typically have cost and time, but they don't have workflow reliability. And I've argued previously that if you don't have workflow reliability, you cannot, with confidence, interpret the results of your cost and time reports. Right? Yeah. So, I started working on the problem, how do we best use available capacity when you're out of time for adjusting load? So daily work planning, weekly work planning, right? And this came up with something very simple. Only include in daily and weekly work plans tasks that are sound, meaning all constraints have been removed that can be removed before the planned period. And what are typical constraints on construction tasks? Let's name some.
Material.
Material. Somebody else? Design. Yep.
Weather.
Yep.
Tools.
Tools.
Space.
Workspace.
Workers.
Workers. Equipment. Right? Yep. Sometimes you might also be missing submittals. You might be missing answers to requests for information. Right? You might require permits when you're in an operating environment like a hospital for a permit for making noise or vibration, or in a, say, an operating plant like a refinery, permit for open fire, right? Yeah. There's all kinds of different things that can constrain a task, but they're identifiable, and that's the recommendation, is that we only put tasks on our plans. We only commit to doing things we know we have everything we need to do it with. Yeah? Okay, that's sound. Sequenced, that it's in the right sequence so that we're not making a one step forward only to have to take 2 steps back at some time in the future, right? Pay the penalty for doing work out of sequence. And very often when people get interrupted, like Phillips' crew doing those gas and fuel oil lines, they will look for some other place to work in order not to lose that capacity, right? Because if they don't, they're gonna have to pay for it, and so they want to use it and get something out of it. But that tends to drive people to do work out of sequence, right? Because we're not very rigorous typically about what we allow people to select, right? Sized, and here, remember, if we're really interested in reliable release of work, right, we want to size the tasks to be accomplished to the capability of the people that are going to do the work. Unit rates, don't use averages, right? Because the average person doesn't exist, right? Averages do, but the average person doesn't, right? And then well-defined, we've already seen that, an example of it in Philip's case, right? The people doing his tasks can tell by looking. And also another feature of that is that you can tell at the end of the planned period by looking if the work was completed or not, right? So it's specified in physical units, right, that are identifiable and can be tracked. Okay? When you do this, your PPC goes from the 50 to 55% range to the 70 to 75% range. And the increase in productivity is pretty much proportional. Okay? I then started working on the problem, a problem that is revealed when you note that you could have 100% PPC and yet the project be behind schedule. Yeah? Yes? You're making the best use of available capacity, you're protecting your productivity, but you're not protecting your progress, right? And that means we have to have a mechanism in our production control system for making ready work that should be done so it can be done. Yeah? And again, it's a simple solution. Analyze and remove constraints. So remember the constraints we listed, right? There will be different constraints for design tasks, different constraints for procurement tasks, and so forth, but those constraints can be identified. And we want to do that in looking ahead 3 to 6 weeks and determine whether or not that constraint exists. And if it does exist, we get somebody, the appropriate person or persons, to commit to removing it, right? If we can't remove it in time, we don't let it go onto the weekly work plan. Yeah? So this is a variant of get bad news early, right? Because you have more time to fix it, and if you can't fix it, you have more time to develop an alternative work plan. Then obviously, well, it's not obvious, I guess. We're probably not going to go into this today, but one of the big opportunities here in this look ahead or make ready process is to break down tasks into operations. And you know you have operations. Operations are that level of process definition where the steps in the operation are assignments that are given to individuals or subcrews. Okay? And then design those new operations collaboratively, right? with the people that are going to do the work. The next thing I noticed was that the quality of schedules was not very good. They weren't well divided, they weren't well sequenced, right? They weren't well structured. And so we developed, a lot of this was, it was based, what we developed was pool planning, and it was based upon something that was already going on, but we've made some modifications to it. And it's really a sophisticated technology called stickies on a wall, right? So, I think if you had asked me 20 years ago what I thought about planning, is planning primarily technical or is it primarily social? And I would have said, 80% technical, 20% social, right? I think I was just wrong. Yeah. I think I was just wrong. So, and the second thing I would say about this is, and it's again, it's a insight into my own change of mind and learning, is that I think I would have said at that time that collaborative planning is primarily justified because of the motivational impact that you get. People buy into the plan that they help produce, and that's true. But even if that didn't exist, collaborative planning is better because it produces better plans. I've never been involved in one of these pool scheduling events, pool planning events, where someone, maybe more than one, didn't reveal something that was critical for achieving the time target. Right? And when you have the right people in the room, the people that actually have the experience with doing the work that's being planned, that tends to happen much more often. Right? Yes?
One thing that we're working with here at NCC, I know both in construction where we call NCC Big and in design with NCC Big Studio. One of the issues are the detail level that you put down in these notes.
Right.
How do you work with that?
I'll actually speak about that in just a minute, but generally speaking, what I suggest is that as you go from master to phase schedule to look ahead to weekly and daily plans, you're going from boulders to rocks to pebbles to dust, right? So as you get closer in time to the event, you increase the level of magnification, right? But since there's some dropout probabilities, you don't want to waste your time on something that may not make it all the way to the bottom, right? So, and you're progressively engaging people who are more the direct workers who are doing the job. And at the finest level of detail, they need to be involved. So. Other questions? You're not interrupting me very much. You thought I wouldn't notice.
How often? I work with this visual planning.
Oh, good.
Often in construction.
Mm-hmm.
And we have an idea about 10 to 15 weeks with this sticky note planning. How long?
I don't think there's any way to say specifically. I think you can apply it to tomorrow's work, right? I mean, one operation, one task. But generally speaking, you know that you have, one of the first constraint or first criterion is you want to have the people in the room who are doing that work, right? And when those people change, you know you've changed the work being done, right? And so you match it to the people in the room. And if you cannot get all the people in the room, you drop off the last trade rather than the first one, right? And you take the work all the way to that last trade. So I don't think it really works just to have a time, especially because time is different in short projects and long projects, right? If you're in a short project, you'll have very shorter phase periods, right? But you still should plan it to the phase because that is specific to a certain set of skills. Right? Others? Okay. All right. So this is how it looks all together. One way of looking at it. So should, can, will, did. I proposed early on in the development of this system that I was doubling the vocabulary of production control, right? Because normally it's just should and did. And control starts by comparing did to should, and if there's a negative variance, that triggers management attention, right? That's what we think of as project control. But that's really like steering a car by looking in the rearview mirror, right? It's after the fact reaction, right? And what we want is an active control that is more like steering the car towards its destination, right? Causing the future, not reacting to a past that's already fact, right? Okay. So master schedules would ideally just be phase durations and overlaps, key milestones that are critical for production, designing and making, or perhaps for some special needs of a client. For example, clients will often want to take legal possession of an asset in order to be able to do tax write-offs, right? To expense it in a tax year. And if that's important to the client, then it's important to us, right? But limit it if we can to major milestones and just, site preparation, substructure, superstructure, and so on, right? And then progressively detail that schedule, working with the people that are going to work in each phase by phase, using a collaborative pool planning system, which apparently some of you are doing. Yeah. Then every week, drop into a look-ahead window, which is typically 6 weeks long, and that's just based on experience that you typically, on most projects, you need that much time in order to overcome a deficiency in something major like design information or materials, right? Could be longer, could be shorter, but we've done last planner on plant turnarounds where you're planning, you have 3 shifts in a 24-hour period, right? And you're planning shift by shift. So there's no hard and fast rules. You have to keep thinking. In the look-ahead planning period, we do our identification and removal of constraints, our task breakdown, and collaborative design of operations. And then we only allow into weekly work plans those tasks that have met our quality criteria for soundness, safety, size, and definition. Yeah? It's simple, right? It's just hard work. So I've become pretty convinced that we're never going to be perfect planners. I have seen occasionally for a few weeks in a row 100% PPC, but it's very rare. Routinely now, companies are getting 85% PPC, right? But getting to 100 is another matter. Yep.
Getting to 100, I assume that costs a lot of money. What's your...
Why do you assume that?
Having total control, for me, I would guess that costs money because you're very thorough in your work.
Yeah.
And getting to 95%, maybe that's to allow a bit of mishaps.
I'll tell you what, I will accept that there is theoretically the possibility that at some point, at some level of investment in planning, you don't get a sufficient return to cover your cost, your investment. But let's find it. Let's find that. Let's find that boundary. I don't think it exists, but it might.
You think 100% is
It doesn't matter what I think. Let's find out. It's an empirical question, right? But what I insist on is let's find it. Let's look for it, right? Let's push until it doesn't make sense to push more. And we're not nearly there, right? So when we get there, let's have it again. Let's have this conversation, right? It's the same question in quality, right, and defect reduction. There's a school of thought that says that the lower your defect rate, the harder it is to get another jot down, right? That there are two schools of thought. Okay, so while it may be impossible to be perfect planners, right, it is possible to never make the same mistake twice. Yeah? It's just very, very, very difficult, right? But there's some things in our business that really push against that happening. And one of them is just the psychological momentum to press forward on projects, right? It's like a riptide, right? It just sweeps you along, right? But one of the secrets to success, if we really want to get better, is to resist that tide and to have the personal and the organizational discipline to take time to be reflective, to analyze, to explore, to take preventive action, and consequently get better every time we do it. Right? The other thing that militates against it in our industry is we tend to have educated people to be afraid to tell the truth. Right? Because if you tell the truth, you're as likely to be drawing fire as to be contributing to learning from breakdowns. And as long as people are afraid, rightly or wrongly, that they're going to be punished for admitting error or even being associated with it, they're not going to do it. And if we don't have that source of information, it's impossible to really understand fully enough what really happened to the point that we can prevent it reoccurring. Yep. So these are some chesty problems, right? But huge opportunities. And they go to the culture of an organization and the leadership in that organization. Okay, there are other things we could talk about, but just to let you know, there are other metrics besides PPC that are very interesting. This is task made ready and tasks anticipated, which measure the success of your look ahead and make ready processes. So I strongly advise you to use those.
Just ask a
Sure.
question. Do you think if you try a last plan system and you don't succeed, is there any one of these levels that are more common that it's
That
harder
it breaks down.
Is it that you have a failure in the master scheduling and
It typically fails here,
yeah.
and it typically fails there. Yep.
Why?
Sorry?
Why?
Why? I think because this is hard work, right? This is kind of the dog work of the industry, you know, checking things, following up, calling, pressing, expediting, right? And it's a lot easier just to go to work and see if you can make it happen. Right? Yeah.
I think it could be hard if you see the constraints that really not push forward. You can see that you have like 9 of 10, and you will see if you won't start with this, you will be 2 weeks behind.
Well, in some cases, it makes sense to make a bet, to take a risk, right? But you do it publicly and carefully, right? So everybody knows there's some probability this isn't going to work, and they can have, you know, an ace in the hole, so to say. They can have an alternative plan for working around that prospect, right? Yeah, there's certainly occasions where you almost have to take a risk, but you want to take calculated risks. You're not just gambling, right? It's not. You don't want the odds to be with the house. You want to have the odds on your side, right? Yeah. More questions?
Yeah, we have where we work. We have big problems implementing the PPCs.
PPC?
The PPC. Yeah.
Okay.
Because maybe different. I don't know why, but it feels like the leaders at the construction sites
Mhm.
are afraid to, for once, they're afraid to show that their plans aren't that good, and
Right.
and also they don't want the guys outside to have this bad feeling about you only did 50%.
Right, right. I think a lot of that depends upon how you react to the numbers, right? How management reacts to the numbers, right? And so it goes to this question that I was raising down here about admitting error, right? So we want to create a culture where people don't deliberately make mistakes, but they are happy to participate in understanding how to prevent them happening again, right? So if we really focus on prevention, and we focus not on the person, but on the process, right, then we'll have better luck with what you're talking about. Right? Because I think that it's normal, since most of our metrics are designed to convict, right? Right? And so they're naturally going to think, well, this is another one of those. This is for somebody else's use, not mine, right? But we want it to be a tool used by the foreman, used by the frontline supervisor, used by the people in the crew, used by the design squad boss, right, to learn how to prevent it happening again, right? But you have to show leadership in that and change people's belief, their trust in you, right? Okay, should we go on? Yes.
With a very high level of PPC, 100%, couldn't that also indicate that you have a rather low ambition level?
It could indicate
reaching 100%.
Any system can be gamed. The best effort in that direction I've ever seen is a group of foremen on a project were putting on this week's work plan what they did last week. That didn't last. It wasn't successful very long, but I thought it was really an interesting attempt, right? I mean, everyone's going to try it, right? And the only way to prevent it is, of course, you have to be awake, right? But is to get them convinced, just in this conversation we just had, that this is really not something that's for the purpose of convicting them of a crime, but of revealing how good our planning system really is, right? So we can make it better.
So it's more like you look at the system, not the person.
Exactly. It's the system, the process, not the person, right? In some cases, after you go through the system and process, you may find, well, this guy just can't count or something, right? I don't know what it is. And then he's just playing out of position, and you got to put him in a different job or get him out of that job, right? But don't start there, right?
Yes, I recognize that ambition thing. That because many projects, they use the numbers to encourage that they are good, so they like cheat with the
Right.
system. So
I'll tell you a story that I've heard. It's not my story, but it's a story that you could tell, or maybe a different version of it, in the face of that problem. There's a guy that goes to work for Toyota in their Georgetown, Kentucky assembly plant. He's an American. He raised in an American company. I think he worked for GM. And he went to Toyota, he was trained, and finally he went to work in his job in the plant as a plant supervisor. And he was responsible for one of the lines, I don't remember which. And in the weekly staff meeting, it came his turn to report, and he gave this glowing report, everything's going great, we got this numbers and shipped this and all that, right? And the plant manager said, excuse me, what problems have you had? And he said, well, we haven't had any problems. He says, well, go back and find some and come back when you've found them. That's his job, is not to report his successes, right? It's not about him, it's about the business, right? His job is to find the problems that are surfaced by the way we operate so they can be fixed, right? Okay, so I'm going to go on to something else. Are you in the right room? You can leave if you have to. Yeah. Okay, I'm not quite going on to something else, sorry. So here's some principles for Last Planner. I might just say, as a preamble to the principles, there's a kind of a foundational assumption, and that's that all plans are forecasts and all forecasts are wrong. The further into the future you attempt to forecast, the more wrong you're going to be, and the greater the level of detail at which you attempt to forecast, the more wrong you're going to be. Therefore, don't do detailed master schedules, right? Because that's exactly what they are. They're attempts to look far into the future at a high level of detail, typically in order to restrict discretion, because the people making the schedule don't trust the people that it's made for, right? We can do better. So, given that also, one of the consequences is to plan in greater detail as you get closer to doing the work, produce plans collaboratively with those who will do the work, reveal and remove constraints on planned tasks as a team. That means publicly in a way that's transparent and visible to anyone who needs to know, right? So we can look and see. I worked on a project in the just outside the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. It's a high prestige project, obviously. And when I went to that project, I was asked to come, and I met with the superintendent. He went through a 2-day training in Lean Construction, and I asked him to go back over the weekend and to make sure that the project schedule was up to date, it was tight, right? Everything was just squeaky. And then I said, then I want you to bring all your foremen into a meeting first thing on Monday morning, right? And we're going to go through the schedule, and we're going to do constraints evaluation, constraints analysis. So I wanted to see to what extent they really were making work ready, right? We went through 47 tasks from near in time to further into the future before we found one that was sound. Right? They obviously were not doing constraints analysis, and they obviously were not following the rule that you should only make assignments that are sound. Right? So we went like that, and we replanned the project using pull planning, and the foremen were the ones that did it with us, right, with the superintendent and with our facilitation, and the project went boom, up out of the water. Right? So that's the importance of this. Make reliable promises, and a reliable promise is one that you've given careful thought to, you've done your due diligence, and you take seriously and will feel ashamed if you have to break it, right? We will have to break some of our promises, we do, right? But one of the things that's characteristic of the vast majority of human beings is that they take their promises seriously. And if we didn't, I don't think we could have human society. And if you find someone who doesn't take their promises seriously, get rid of them. That's a sociopath, right? No, it's a sociopath. That's what it is. Right? Okay. Lastly, given that we can't be perfect planners, but we can aspire to never making the same mistake twice, when promises are broken, find root causes and preventions, learn from those breakdowns. And of course that applies to accidents, to defects, to errors, so all types of breakdowns. I want to just show some data to illustrate two things. One is the impact of Last Planner on workflow reliability, on stabilization. Okay? This is from, it doesn't really matter what the project is, but this is the performance factor here, and a performance factor is structured so that you all know this already? No. So one is on budget for productivity, right? And this is a percentage really of budget. So if you're at 0.5, that means that you're spending half as many labor hours to get a unit of product as estimated. Right? That's better in this case, down. And the opposite, if it's 1.5, you're spending 50% more labor hours to get a unit of product than estimated. Right? So on this project, the productivity deteriorated week by week in a very short time to almost 50% over budget. Right? We introduced that just those 4 quality assignments, right? Soundness, size, sequence, and definition, right here, and the impact was almost immediate. This was weekly reported productivity, and you can see it's a wide variation, oscillation, so that was muted, and we turned it in the positive direction, right? Unfortunately, I think we also see here evidence of something Confucius would have said if he had known it. That's that things get worse faster than they get better. Right? That's a joke. My jokes aren't too good, huh? Okay, so this, I'm just using this to illustrate, because as I will show next, Last Planner and PPC does correlate positively, strongly with productivity. But the real gain is in creating sufficient stability in your work processes that it's worth investing in optimization. As long as you're all over the board, what do? Right? The first thing to do is to get stable, right? Get predictable. Yep.
How do you apply that in one-off projects? I can understand if you have a manufacturing or a repetitive process, then that would be fine, but how do you apply that in a one-off project?
This is a one-off project.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah. Refinery revamp, Venezuela, only stinking desert in the country. Yeah.
So
$1.2 billion in 1994 dollars.
So how do they predict, the problems, or obviously that would say the problems learned was from history, or is it just looking ahead or removing constraints that solved all the...
No, this one actually wasn't, we didn't even remove constraints, we just made better weekly work plans.
Really?
Yeah, it has that much impact. Remember I said that it changes PPC from the range of 50% to 75%, just doing that. Now, if you want to be driving the project towards time targets as well, you've got to make work ready in the right sequence and rate. Yeah. So you can't just do this, but just doing this does improve stability. Right? Now, once you have stability, and this is also from a real one-off project. So this is data where I could get PPC and productivity data at the crew level for multiple crews over many months, okay? And that allows us to do statistical analysis to see if there's a positive and statistically significant correlation between the two variables, PPC and productivity. And there is, and if we draw a line of best fit through there, we can determine the equation for that line. And once we have that equation, we can plug in values for PPC and predict productivity as expressed in by performance factor, right? So tell me what you see here. Remember what performance factor means. 0.96 means it's almost budget, right? 0.96 means it's on budget. A little bit better. So what I see, yeah, go ahead. I can see you're about to talk.
So it's 50% is okay for us because that's budget.
That's historical unit rates. In other words, we plan in our industry for a PPC of 50%. We plan productivity at a PPC of 50%. Now, I don't say everybody does it, but that's what's evident in this data. Right?
Why is it like that? Is it because we have the master schedule on such a rock stage, so to speak, not in a dust stage?
I think it's because the industry has traditionally not really done real planning and control. Right? I think it said, this is what we want, this is how we want things to happen, and then we measure when it fails, and we beat people up when it fails, and they cry, right? So.
Is this just the production phase?
No, this is, well, this data is from the production phase, yeah, but I'm pretty confident you'd have similar data from the design phase. I don't have correlation data from design, because they rarely measure productivity. Right. So again, we see a huge opportunity for improvement, right? I mean, it's natural that this would happen. If that, remember the study I did in the early 90s, the finding of average PPC of 54%, right? So it's not surprising to see that the industry is having this connection, right? If that's normal, and I've seen it happen again and again and again, that's in an non-last planner type approach, that's what you're going to have roughly, is somewhere in the 50 to 55% range, right? And that's the basis for our estimating productivity going forward, right? So it's natural. It just needs changing, right?
Did I misunderstand something?
Yes, please.
The higher PPC, the lower performance factor.
Yeah, but remember, lower means better. So here we're using 96. We're at 96% of our estimate for productivity, right? So we're on the good side by 4%. Here we're on the good side by 29%, right? Okay. So this is where we want to be. And as I mentioned, we have a high number of companies now that are routinely in the 80-85% level. And I'll show you some data later on those companies that reveal the impact on their productivity.
Can we just have a quick look at the previous slide?
Sure.
You have a performance factor of 1.5. You could perhaps think that this project had been understaffed from the beginning. You have a plan that you could manage to have a performance factor of 1, but as you begin to see that
well, it's
you
probably
have too few work hours in your
no, because this isn't measuring progress, right? This is measuring productivity. It's the output per unit of labor input, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So you're probably not over.
Performance factor is work hours
Performance factor
compared
is your productivity budget, right?
Okay.
So what amount of man hours you expect to spend in order to produce a certain amount of output,
Okay.
right?
Compared to what you produce. Yeah.
Right, right.
Okay.
Okay. So let's go. Is there more talk about the last planner? I'm happy to talk about. We can stop and work on it. Yeah, go ahead.
Since these were one-off projects,
Right.
what would be your thought if you have a repetitive process? If you're building the same type of construction over and over and over again?
Yeah.
Would the last planner be, is it a good thing to implement in the end, or should you just have it in the first? Or in the,
Well, it depends on what you can routinize, right? I mean, if it's really literally identical, then I think you probably would have a very rudimentary form of last planner because the risk in the system is so small, right? The uncertainty in the system, right?
But you will always have varying factors like weather, people working outside, material flow. So it's hard to ever have, even though the project is the same,
Right.
the process is impossible.
One of the things that I think every industry is a little bit blind to the challenges of other industries, and in repetitive manufacturing might look to us like they've got it made, right? But they don't. I mean, they have headaches every day, right? People not showing up for work, product defects, right? Material defects, all kinds of things, right? And they're always working to improve those things. So, But I think, I mean, obviously, if you can apply it, and the more repetitive the work, the better you all should be able to get at it, right? So. Yep. Okay, how are we doing on time? I'm over. Okay, well, I'll hit the high spots here. Okay, there's a whole bunch of methods we could talk about. Remember I said ideal, principles, methods, right? But and last planner is one of the big methods, right? But it's by far not the only one, right? Here's a whole list I'm not going to talk about, right? And these are mostly applied in the design phase, the engineering phase of projects, right? But here we've got this collection here is what we might call building the project team or the project culture, the project society, right? And that's a key element in every project, right? So let's look at, first of all, look at something that didn't show up. Where is it? Huh. Oh, I'm going the wrong way, that's why. No, it's still not there. Why is it not there? Can you see anything? I can't see anything. It's on the... I don't know why it's not there. Well, I can pantomime. So there's, at Sutter Health, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit later, Sutter Health is a large healthcare company, Northern California, that's embraced lean project delivery and has had a lot of success. And I'll tell about that. But one of the things that they've really stressed are what they call the 5 big ideas. And those 5 big ideas, I will read them, if I can read it, is collaborate, really collaborate, okay? And the reason for the really collaborate is that they don't want you to confuse collaboration with no biting, right? And it's collaboration, effective collaboration is between people with different but interconnected responsibilities for producing something, right? And if they're not doing their job, fighting their corner, then they're not really collaborating. And so you can have disputes within an effectively collaborating team, you can have arguments, and you should, right? And if you don't have disagreements, someone's sitting on their hands, right? Okay? So you have to be sensitive to that. The second one is optimize the whole. And this goes to remember the principle we looked at earlier that said money should be able to move across organizational and contractual boundaries, right? And the purpose of that is to optimize the whole, not the part, right? There was a company that called us meaning the Lean Construction Institute, called us up sometime in 1999 from Orlando, Florida. And it was, turned out to be a guy named Owen Matthews, and Owen was the head of a small air conditioning company in Orlando. And he had been kind of masterminded, but had brought together into a company, a new company, a joint venture, if you will, a multi-party joint venture, a number of different businesses who had been working together for years, right? There was a lot of friendships among them. There was even some intermarriage, high degree of social, religious agreement, right? So you would think that if the opportunity for effective collaboration across business boundaries was possible, then that's where it would happen. And what Owen reported was that they had formed their joint company because they were convinced, through their own experience, that innovations and opportunities for improvement were left undone because of the problem who pays and who gains, right? Who pays and who gains. And so they formed a 3 Musketeers agreement. And they said, we're going to seek and perform work as a team, and we're going to develop an agreement in advance about how to divide the profits or the losses, right? That way, if I have an idea that improves the project but reduces my scope of work, I'm not impeded from advancing it, right? Or if I have an idea that involves you losing some profit, it's not a problem, right? Because your profit is coming from the total profit of the project, right? So that's the notion here. And then the next one is tightly link learning with action. And so I think you can see from our discussion about learning from breakdowns, right, that a premium in Lean is placed upon developing people's capability and in continuous improvement, right? So tightly couple learning with action. And then the fourth one is something I cannot read. Let's see, hang on a second. I know what I can do. I can fix this. That's not going to work. I don't know why this screwy. Screwy. Sorry. Okay, projects as networks of commitment, and that comes right out of the last planner, as we tend to think of projects as formed by contracts, as expressed in terms of budgets and schedules and so on. But another way to think of a project is as a network of commitments formed between the people involved in performing it, right? So, and the last one is increase relatedness. And the idea there is that we want to develop the trust among the members of the team, right? And that trust is developed in part by demonstrating capability and demonstrating reliability, but also in part by learning to understand each other as human beings and not just as fellow workers, right? Not just as cogs in a machine. So these 5 big ideas are really central in the cultural transformation that underlies Sutter Health's accomplishments and those of Lean project delivery.
Maybe you should introduce what Sutter Health is.
I said they were a healthcare organization. Yeah. I'm coming back to Sutter Health. So, but I'm in respect for your time, I think I should probably move forward here. Yeah. Okay. So creating a project society, there's lots of different pieces. Breaking bread together is one thing. If you eat together, you tend to talk about children, families, fortunes, right? Games, sports. You make a different kind of connection, right? This big room concept and co-location is really huge in creating the project society, right? And different projects that might only happen occasionally, that the whole team comes together. On major projects in the U.S. that there's sometimes 100% co-located, so people just move in together, right? So make the space visual, and there's, if you'd go into one of these rooms, and it's not just necessarily one room, it's a whole working space, right? So the walls, the corridors are filled with information about the project, the state of the project, ideas people have, proposals that are being forwarded, right? And many of those I saw in your big room down below here. And then another opportunity is study and learn together. And this is a little bit perhaps odd sounding in a construction environment, but what we've found is that if we can get people to read interesting and provocative things and talk about them together, then it develops like-mindedness. Right? So, and I can recommend some of those if you wish. So building information modeling is a whole big thing. I worked for Bechtel before until 1987, I think. And in 1984, we were experimenting with 3 different modeling softwares, and we selected one. So in the industrial sector, they've been doing modeling for years, for a very long time. But in the building sector, it's come later, right? But now, and I'm sure there are exceptions to this, but in my own experience of major complex projects in the US, there's none that aren't being done using building information modeling. It's just the way it's going to be done. Right? 2001, we introduced a very sophisticated type of model on the Terminal 5 project. I was part of a management consulting team working directly for the owner, BAA, and for Lang O'Rourke, the prime civils contractor. And I can show you a bit of that. I won't show you everything. But this is underneath the main terminal building. And you can see here there are two tunnels going back towards London. You don't know it's towards London, but I do. And these are two rail systems that intersect underneath the terminal building. Okay? And you can see there's a high degree of prefabrication off-site assembly. So these roll mats, these cages, these sacrificial things, these pile caps, and so forth. So we discovered sometime early as we were approaching the construction phase for reinforced concrete structures, we realized that we weren't getting detailed engineering drawings fast enough to support the program. We just weren't going to make it, right? And so we used that as a driver to persuade the client to let us develop the 2D structural design into a 3D model, right? And with that 3D model, and this is just one, this is a tunnel launch chamber for one of those holes, right? With that model, we were able to make detailed engineering the first act of construction rather than the last act of design. And that was a key to keeping on schedule, right? So to illustrate that, so what we were using the last planner system, but in a web-based version where we could communicate signals over distances, so back to suppliers. In this case, the suppliers were quite close, within a couple of kilometers of each other. But we would establish a pour date for a slab or a wall or whatever, a beam, and then that would send a signal back to a team that consisted of a modeler, a structural engineer, and somebody with tattoos on their arms, right? And we figured when those guys detailed that installation, who else needed to be asked? Those are the experts. They had 2 days to do that detailing in the model. Then the model was able to drive the shears and the benders in the rebar shop, which we constructed and managed directly. And then we would prefabricate, we would pre-assemble in the shop those cages, mats, whatever it was. And then we allowed 2 days for installation. And we didn't need 2 days, it was really a one-day operation. But we started with 2 days because we were aware that the placing crews would be skeptical about the ability of the logistics system to give them what they needed when they needed it. And so I said, let's have them walk out of the job every day past what they're going to install tomorrow. That developed confidence, right? As long as we could perform, and we did, right? And then we went to just in time. So we could deliver and lift directly off the trailer without unhooking, right, as opposed to staging the trailer overnight, right? That kind of an approach allowed us to radically condense the schedule. So we originally had a 9-month duration for the critical path item was Railbox East. We did it in 5.5 months, and in so doing saved 776,000 pounds, or 19% of the labor budget for steel fixing on site, right? Now there were costs off site, but the net was positive. And this is what was said in an industry paper at the end of the civils phase. First civil project delivered on time in the last 40 years, $125 million savings, 10% of contract value, and that was split 50-50 between the client and all members of the team, okay, except the consultants. Okay. I think I should probably stop. I'm 25 minutes over.
If we're also going to talk about the VDC, the connection between VDC and Lean, then I think we should jump to that.
Okay. Okay, so these are, let me just, maybe what I'll do is I'll just show you the Sutter Health thing, because it ends with the VDC example, right? So back to Sutter Health, I mentioned who they were. They've been working with us and us with them since 2003, when they committed to Lean for their capital program. In 2005, they completed their first Lean project, okay? And they started small. They didn't start with major hospitals. They started with medical clinics and medical office buildings and those kinds of things, right? So, but at this point, which was end of August last year, they had completed 22 Lean projects. No projects went over budget or schedule. And this is the client's report, not somebody else's. No sacrifice of scope or quality was made in order to achieve those time or cost targets. Cost at completion was averaged 3.4% under budget, and cost at completion averaged approximately 15% under market. So the budgets were set aggressively relative to market. Yeah. Example of one project, this has actually been completed since that report. It was completed significantly, it says ahead of schedule and under budget. It was actually 6 months ahead of schedule. No compromise again. And now start looking at some of the data. Construction rework 15 to 80% less than trade baselines, depending on the trade. Productivity 5 to 20% greater than trade baselines, depending upon the trade. Mechanical and plumbing installed exactly to the model 99% of the time. Electrical and framing not as good. Fewer RFIs, change orders, failed inspections compared to their history, their historical data. And tool time or labor utilization significantly higher. Tool time would be measured normally on a construction project in the 40 to 50% range if it's good. This was 70%. Okay? Do you know what, does tool time make sense? Just, it's the percentage of paid labor time spent productively. Right? Sorry? RFI, request for information. So it's the mechanism for getting a problem solved that construction encounters in the field, or a question about design, maybe a design detail. Right? And this is just a picture comparing the model and the actual, right, that they said was 99% coincident. Whew. Okay, questions, comments? Yes.
What I keep hearing is that culture is the key to success factors, or is the success factor in basically everything. I mean, you can have all the tools in the world, but if you don't implement that in the culture, then you basically fail.
Yeah, you may get it to work once, twice, but it won't take. It'll be like an alien body rejected, right? So, yes.
I think that communication is the key to success.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay.
In our lives, to learn from mistakes and to learn from, as you said before, that if you identify a problem, it's better to identify it a number of weeks ahead. By having an open communication,
right,
it encourages.
Right. And people tend to be more willing to be open in their communication when they trust, trust each other, yeah, when they trust their superiors, their bosses in the organization, not to abuse their power, right? To be fair, right? To focus on the process, not the person. Yeah. Yeah. It all works together.
I was working in the auto industry before, at Volvo, and at one point of time we had a lot of problems with quality, and it was we couldn't identify where in the production problem that the quality mistakes appeared. So we said that we will try to have some kind of sign that everyone that have done some kind of working job, that you put a sign what kind of employee number you have or
I see.
your signature.
Right.
And just to have some time to try to identify where in the
Mhm.
line that the problem occurred. And in the end we had a discussion with the union, because they said you can't do this, you can't find out and put the blame on some of the employees. But we turned it around and said that we're just trying to identify the problem.
Trying to figure out where it starts, right?
Yeah, and try
Not-
to create a customer-supplier relation that you're
Right.
proud of the job that you're doing.
Mhm.
And then in the end it turned out that it was one or two of the employees that didn't have the information or education of just how to do it.
Right.
So we didn't try to find someone to point out, we just want to identify them to learn them.
Yeah.
And as soon as that was identified, it was the responsibility of the company to educate them in the correct way.
Right.
So we tried to make them, instead of finding out someone who was guilty, we made them proud of
Mm.
their job.
Yeah, that's great.
So that was one of
Yeah,
cultural.
that's a great story. Yeah. Mhm. That's clearly where we want to go.
Yeah.
Right.
So what kind of business do you think are the most successful ones? Because I think that the auto industry have been working with lean production for many, many
Well, they
years.
came out of the automotive industry, so they have a long learning curve ahead of us, right? The advantage we have is that we can benefit from what they've already learned,
Yeah.
right? So we don't have to spend 50 years to do what it took them 50 years to do. It's a disadvantage of being first.
Yeah.
Any more comments, questions?
How small can a big room be?
How many people in it?
Sometimes we have a discussion that we have too small, the projects are too small or too short, and that
Oh, I
you
see.
can't place people in a room for weeks working with
Mm.
one project, because the
Mm.
consultants have like 4
Right,
projects parallel in different phases.
right.
And do you have those, in large projects you can see that it will work, but
Yeah, well, even in some somewhat large projects like this one, this $329 million project, they met once a week as a team. But everyone came from wherever they lived and came to the project and spent that day. And it was a very intense day, right? And that doesn't mean they're not communicating in between, but it's a different kind of communication when you're looking each other in the eye, right? So that's where they would do their pull planning, they would revive, update, right? They would make their commitments, they would do, to the extent that they could, cause analysis, right? Root cause analysis. So, yeah. I don't think there's any necessarily right answer, but I think you certainly want to bring, you don't want to depend upon collaboration at a distance before you establish personal connection. Right?
I think it's often an argument not to, when you're afraid of working in a big room. Or
I see.
big studio,
Yeah.
You have that, this is an argument not to, you
Yeah.
search for difficulties.
Yeah, yeah,
It's a different attitude.
yeah.
On
Annie?
this particular project, how did you decide, or how was it decided which people were supposed to be engaged at which stages during the design phase? And were you having calculators there? Did you have
Well, there's quite a big difference in terms from one project to another in how they've made those decisions. I think that the general tendency is toward being more inclusive rather than less. That is, involve more people earlier. Okay? And more people, I mean, in this case, they have a shared risk-reward type arrangement, so more people in the risk pool. But
Because one of the issues that we have here is that people with, and then again, I don't know how that's determined, but those who consider themselves having less impact on the design, doing less work,
mm,
are less likely wanting to take part in these design studios.
right.
Uh,
Well, they have less money to make,
Exactly.
right?
So that are one of the factors that we are working hard with.
Yep. Yeah, I think if you can't control the commercial terms, then you just have to fight that one house to house.
So in that project here, stable and economic?
They weren't all. In fact, they regret. I've just done a detailed study of 3 projects, of these projects. This is one of them. And one of the lessons learned is that they failed to include some people at the right time in the right way, right? And they would do it differently. Sorry?
Can you name just some of them that were missing?
I'm not sure I can. I'd be making it up.
Okay.
I could make it up, but. Yeah. Maybe another lesson about modeling is that I know back in, I think maybe 2007 or 6, one of the first really intensive efforts at modeling a project was done on another Sutter Health project. And it was a smaller project, but still very complicated, a $100 million medical clinic. And they did intensive modeling of everything except the finishes. Okay, so they didn't put the furniture in, they didn't put the doorknobs, they didn't put the stops, they didn't put the plugs, they didn't, right, the plates and all that stuff, right? And it seemed at the time like it was a good idea. But the places that they did model worked really smoothly. They didn't in a $100 million project, they didn't fill one 55-gallon drum with sheet metal scrap, right? And clinics have huge amounts of sheet metal ductwork, right? And they didn't fill it because things fit, right? And that project was really considered to be a model as long as you looked at that mechanical phase. But if you looked at the finishes phase, it reverted to type, and it was a mess. And I was part of the debrief and the team with the owner at the end of that project, and one of our takeaways was we need to model it all. Because where we don't model it is where we get bit in the butt, right? So that's and that, unfortunately, that lesson's been learned several times over since then. Okay, thanks for coming. Yep.
Now, when you're here at NCC, what is your impression of our company, and what do you think about it?
Well, I've only just arrived today, but of course I've heard of NCC before, and I've worked with people from NCC in other Scandinavian countries. And I'm impressed that you're implementing lean principles and methods, and it looks like you're taking that seriously, and I'm always excited about companies that are doing that.
And then the other question is more in related to the VDC. How do you see that those two concepts are complementing each other, and how can we at NCC elaborate on that in the near future?
Okay. Well, there's probably several different ways to speak to that question, but maybe I'll restrict myself to one. I think of Lean as a fundamental management philosophy. It's not a specific toolkit of methods or tools, and it uses methods and tools that are available whether they are merged within the Lean community or were developed somewhere else, right? But it's simply, the only criterion is that they be fit for purpose, right? They're the sharpest tools, and VDC is clearly one of those, right? But I think of VDC as a tool or method, a big one, a very complicated one that offers lots of potential, but I think it needs to be driven by the Lean philosophy. No matter how good a tool is, it exists within a society, within a culture. It's implemented, and it's implemented better or worse depending upon the ability of the organization to use it. Right? And that's a function of the way they do work, the way they work together or don't work together in the organization. So I'm thinking that as powerful as it is technically, VDC still needs the commercial, organizational, and managerial framework that Lean provides in order to be of maximum benefit.